Okay, so before we move on to our definition of terms, I would like to remind that the clip that you just saw, that you just watched, is just one tool of the many tools in detecting deception. So it doesn't mean that, let's say, if you follow Dr. Paul Ekman and his workshops and his books about deception, and let's say you have the skills in detecting the emotions, or the highest level is micro expressions, those expressions that appear less than or a fraction of a second. Let's say you have that skill, it doesn't mean that you are qualified to say what is deception and what is not. So it is just one tool out of the many tools that we will discuss in this video report. Okay, according to the authors of our reference book, um, chapter 2 is about detection of malingering and deception in forensic evaluations. However, there's a reminder that the authors just provide us the sequence of decisions when it comes to criminal situations, which incorporates the analysis of unintentional distortion and deliberate deception. It means that the evaluators, let's say us, as forensic experts, we are not free of our own personal bias, as well as the defendant, our clients, are also not free of their own personal bias. So there's so many things to weigh on before coming to a concrete or final decision or conclusion about our forensic evaluation. Also, if we can recall our main lessons in our psychological testing and assessment, when we came up with our final output of psychological report, we considered every sources of information that is needed to come up with our report, such as interviewing the client, asking questions about relevant history in terms of work, in terms of medical history, in terms of crime history, and aside from that, we also conducted series of tests. These tests included the appropriate test that measures the the dimensions that we want to measure. Aside from the test, we also discussed about using personality test, ability test, projective test, and also we discussed about interviewing significant others for more relevant information. So as you can see, just like in my report today, deception analysis or deception detection composed of many varied sources that is relevant to the case, and it is like a wide range of database, so that the forensic report will be solid and based on empirical data. So speaking of database as our guide, we have here FDA 5 or Forensic Distortion Analysis 5. This is a guideline that was authored by the same authors of our reference book in this report. And then it is a set of interlocking procedures that is designed to answer questions relevant to deception. So the guidelines include the findings and methods in deception analysis. The purpose of FDA 5 are the following. So I'll just mention some very important purpose. So number one is the reliability and validity of the database of information. So as I have mentioned earlier, if you are the evaluator, if you are the expert, then your client, the defendant, is not free to commit distortion and deception. And aside from your client, the significant others that can shed light or that can give more information about the case are also not free or open to commit deception and distortion. So this means that if you are the evaluator, are you also capable or are you trained enough to detect the deception and distortion of your client as well as the significant others that may contribute relevant information to the case? And also, if you are going to employ psychometric test, does your test really measures what it intends to measure? So another question is, when do you do test, retest, or parallel test or parallel forms kind of test? When do you do ability test just to measure the deception and distortion of the case? And aside from that, as the evaluator, do you consider the time prior to the actual event or actual crime, or do you just focus on the context of the actual scene or the actual commission of the crime? Another purpose of FDA 5 is to determine the response styles of the client, meaning does the client responding in all honesty, meaning the client is giving 100% honest information about the crime, or does the client showing faking good or faking bad, or a mixture of many response style? And aside from that, does the client has fluctuations in response style? So that will be discussed later on. Now, speaking of response style, does the client also is showing misrepresentation, or basically this is faking also? So misrepresentation, is this the purpose of the client in order to gain something or in order to be aligned to his personal interests? That's why the client is committing distortion and deception. So that will also be discussed. And another purpose of FDA 5 in my slide is FDA tries to incorporate all other relevant processes because it is not a standalone source of information, so it is a comprehensive guideline. That's why it attempts to standardize the process of deception analysis. Okay, so earlier I was always mentioning about distortion and deception. So right now, an intentional distortion, from the word itself, it is the non-deliberate distortion in information and other factors that is relevant to the offense that is being committed. Aside from we tackled about memory last week, we discussed that retrieval of memory influence the reliability of information about the case. So right now, aside from that, we also have the level of stress of the perpetrator when he or she committed the crime. Aside from that, is the perpetrator in the proper orientation? Is he or she not confused of the time of the day itself? That also contributes to the reliability of the information. Also is fatigue. It will be discussed later, the contribution of fatigue in an intentional distortion. Aside from that, is there a organic cause to some impairments that is being reported by the perpetrator? So, brain damage due to trauma and accidents will also be considered in the gathering of your database of information. Aside from that, psychosis. So if the defendant, the perpetrator, reported that he or she has episode of psychosis during the commission of the crime, you as the evaluator, you should know what are the signs and symptoms of psychosis so that you can cross-examine the validity of the self-report of your client or the perpetrator, as well as your empirical database about the information and that I discussed about psychosis. So that is the many things you as the evaluator should consider when it comes to an intentional distortion of information. Okay, so third, it's about deliberate deception. So right now, this is intentional deception on the information that is relevant to the crime or the offense that is committed. So we will tackle here about the response style. I mentioned earlier what is faking bad, what is faking good, what is malingering, what is 100% honesty of information that is being reported by the perpetrator. And aside from that, what are the targets? What are the reasons of the perpetrator in making deliberate deception? What is the purpose and what is the gain on the side of the perpetrator? Okay, so this is the last definition of criminal responsibility. So as you can see in the slide, the keyword is the intention, recklessness, and negligence of the person who committed the crime. So basically, it is about the importance of self-control and choice at the time of commission of the crime. So it is highlighted that as evaluator, should we review DSM and ICD in order to assess the mental condition of the perpetrator so that we can determine the severity of that condition that impacts the responsibility of the perpetrator for the crime. Also, it is recommended to cross-examine self-reports of the perpetrator versus the actual skills and abilities of the perpetrator during the commission of the crime.